No. Firstly, it's insulting to God, I think. And secondly, we were created different so that we can have different cultures, different experiences. And there's such richness in that, and there's something to discover in that, you know. I mean, I've traveled quite widely, and I'll make an example. When I went to Vietnam, I was probably the only black person with braids again there. Why did I go there? I went there to experience culture. I went there to experience life there, their food, cuisine. So I feel like anyone else, if they want to come to South Africa too, they're coming here for the richness of our identities, our tribes and our cultures. So let's not be non-racial and, you know, colorblind. There is no point to that. We will be bland and uncolorful, and really, as I said, it just will be insulting to God, and we can't learn and grow from each other.
So it's also a question I think I'd like to say yes and no. Every person comes with their own context, their own background, their own hurts, their own disadvantages and privileges, and some of that can be good and positive, and I can learn from someone else's ethnical background some positive traditions or attributes, or but also there can be negatives that we should be aware of and say, okay, those are things that we don't necessarily want to bring into our new identity. And I think that's where we must be aware that as a church, I mean, we are no longer separate ethnicities, we are one in Christ. So in Christ we are a new people, we have a new identity as Christians, children of God, and I think that should be our primary identity. Celebrate the diversity, celebrate the wonderful heritage that we all bring, the gifts we all bring, but also realize that every person is an individual with unique gifts, and also realizing that we shouldn't cling too much to these ethnic identities. We should cling to our identity in Christ.
I don't think we should strive to be colorblind. I think if we do that, we're actually dishonoring the beauty of God's creation. And so if I'm not going to recognize that I'm colored and that the next person is black or the next person is white, I don't think we should actually be defining each other by that skin tones. But if I don't recognize that your skin tone or the next person's skin tone is different from me, then I'm not really celebrating who you are, that you are different.
A while back, I would have said, I don't see color, everyone is the same to me, and I treat people equally and stuff like that. But in the past few weeks with the whole George Floyd thing and educating myself with everything that's been on social media, I've realized that we can't say that, because then we are not acknowledging our differences. So if we just say we see everyone as the same, then we're not acknowledging that we are different and that we have different experiences, and it's okay that we have different experiences and we can learn from each other's experiences. We need to be acknowledging that we are different and we need to see color.
You know, God has a sense of humor, because I was sitting with this question, and the answer that I got is non-racial, because I was teaching my children school on different colors. Now, you know, they had to look at the colors, identify within the house these colors. So now, my older son, then we have brown. So he identifies brown, and there's a teddy bear that is brown and all of that. So he says there's brown, and he says mommy is brown, daddy is brown, his sister is brown, and now he looks at his brother. Now his brother is more light-skinned than all of us. You know, he's lighter in complexion than all of us. And then he says, what about him? And now me and my wife look at each other, because we're busy with this. You know, I was busy looking at this. You know, we look at each other. So we explained to him, no, he's also brown, but he's light brown. So we always should strive to ensure we are non-racial. We cannot be colorblind. We need to be non-racial, but not teach our children and people and create systems that teach inferiority or supremacy.
I think we should strive to be non-racial in the workplace. There's some policy that certain companies have where you need to have a certain percentage of this race and certain percentage of that race. And I almost wish it didn't get to that point. We should just look at what the person is able to do and the qualification and the skill and experience, never mind the race. But on the other hand, there's one race that has all of that skill, that was given that boost again to go and study that qualification and have that skill, and there's another race that that's not as educated. But just back to my point, which was, I really feel that we should look at the abilities of the person and not necessarily just the skin color. In the same breath, I also do think that where this policy comes in of having a certain a percentage of this race and this race to make sure it balances out, I think that's a good start to kind of going towards that point.
No, I think, colorblind, I think is artificial, because my eyes show me that you're white and your eyes show me I'm black. And there is nothing wrong. God in his wisdom created people of different abilities, different colors, different attitudes. It is God's design. And that is why, Peter there says in that Acts 10, says, I now realize that God has no favoritism, because God does not honor people. He honors principles. So we have, as a matter of principle, accept the diversity of people and not pretend as if they are not, those differences are not there. In fact, we must celebrate the differences. Just as in marriage, my wife and I are as different east to the west in many ways. But by the grace of God, for 46 years, we have been able to live in marriage together, and happily so.
Definitely, there's definitely a thing called white privilege, and I think white people know it too. I think it's also highlighted in movements such as Black Lives Matter, where only black people are talking about the injustices, the inequality, and white people have nothing to say. In life, that there are some people who are living in abject poverty, but you don't say anything because you're comfortable where you are. And why are you comfortable where you are? Because there were segregations, there were laws long time ago that puts you in a better position than anyone else. So poverty looks normal to you when it's actually a product of the apartheid regime, slavery, and everything else that was before. And for as long as a white person will not speak into that, it's because they feel threatened that those things will be those privileges will either be taken away from them, or that other white people will look at them in a different way and isolate them and not treat them the same, because why are you siding with them and not keeping ours as ours?
I think white privilege does exist, and I think I alluded to that just by saying that that I do feel predominantly white people, and particularly under the apartheid era, that they've been advantaged. And so I think in many ways they've been privileged, they've had access to a lot more than people of color. If I could define it, I would say that white privilege is just having an advantage in life. And if I should be put a bit more emphasis to it, I would even say that they had an unfair advantage. They still gained the benefit of that unadvantage still today in many ways.
So certainly historically, apartheid was legally enforced privilege for whites, I would say, up until 94. And I think that painful legacy still has an impact on the minds of a lot of people in our country. So while I don't think there's systemic, legally enforced white privilege, of course, I do think some people can identify with the idea that the color of their skin is a stumbling block for them. They might find it harder to be trusted. People might be more suspicious of their motives if they're black or brown compared to a white person. Whereas a white person, maybe the color of your skin might not be a stumbling block in certain situations. You might have the benefit of the doubt. I think the term white privilege is not a biblical term, of course, in itself. So we have to be careful what we're calling white privilege and how big an emphasis it has in our minds.
I am becoming more and more aware of it and seeing it in the way we live. And the best how I can define it is probably the way that us as white people have not had those injustices against us based on our skin color.
Yes, there is white privilege. As much as a male, I've got a privilege over a woman in the workplace. It's real, I cannot deny it. white privilege, you see, I was actually talking to my wife about this. My wife is beautiful. She's, you know, God gave her beauty. It's a God-given beauty. You know, she's beautiful. And white privilege is not a God-given advantage. It's not a God-given advantage. It's being born into a system that has been systematically designed to work for you for hundreds and thousands of generations. It's the system you're born into. Not to say white people don't work hard. I've seen a lot of white people who work very hard. But the system works even better for those that even takes further. Even if you don't work hard, the system still works for you. Even if you work hard, work for you. As opposed to a black man, you're climbing up this hill, always climbing up this hill, always having to work 10 times, put in 10 times the effort to not even get the same recognition, lower recognition than your white counterparts.
I do believe that there is such a thing as white privilege. Like I said, the system has catered to a certain racial group. So I think I'm just going to bring it back to my environment and where I'm surrounded and how and why I say that. So whenever I come back to college from my holiday break, I always hear these stories of, oh, I went to Italy, oh, I went to Milan, and I went to this and that, and then they ask me, so Nikita, what did you do? I'm like, no, I just went to Waterfront and Grand West because, and then I hear of, oh no, we went with my dad's yacht and we went to go visit family in England, you know, and for me, it strikes me because I just realize that it's not their fault, but their forefathers were given this privilege of sitting with old money and having beautiful life experiences that I need to work hard for, and then only in the next 10 years I can experience what you're talking about right now.
It's about the person who's the oppressor who has the power and the person that's oppressed. And so we're dividing people according to perceived power that they have, and the struggle is to kind of shift that around, to change the power dynamic. And if that is our main focus, I don't think that's useful. Being aware that I might be blind to the privilege that I have experienced in the past or currently am, and being open to listening to people of color who have felt the other side of that, and maybe empathically listening to that, and not just ignoring or saying that it doesn't exist. On the other hand, I'd like to hope that we can move beyond that there are people that enjoy different kinds of privilege. Acquiring privilege through an honest, good way might be a good thing. Of course, acquiring privilege through a dishonest, immoral way is not a good thing, it's a bad thing, and that needs to be denounced. Hanging on to white privilege rather divides and say white people have inherent privilege and that might make them bad, and black people have inherent disadvantage and that make them victims. I don't think that's a useful mentality necessarily.
Most definitely. Especially in the context of South Africa. Maybe elsewhere it would be a different matter. But in the context of South Africa, where for decades and decades there has been a system that openly, nakedly favors one race against another in every aspect of life. So that cumulatively, over the years, has placed people of the white race in a privileged position vis-a-vis black people. I take one example. Now, I've been doing a study of, from 1910, when the Union of South Africa was formed, 1912, the Land Bank was established, and the Land Bank made loans, grants, subsidies to cooperatives that were exclusively white, to the exclusion of black, colored, Indian farmers. From 1912 until 1993, they were benefiting from the largesse of the state. 1993, the Nationalist Party, just on the eve of the democratic era, passed a law called the Cooperative Amendment Act, number 37 of 1993, that enabled these cooperatives that were public entities to convert into private companies. So public funds were, in a sense, privatized. And that placed all the members of those cooperatives in a far privileged positions vis-a-vis their black counterparts. That's just one example. There are many, many, many others. I remember in 1968, that's when Bani Pichana, Stephen Biko started the South African Association of Student Organization, SASO, and they started articulating black consciousness as a philosophy for the psychology of the black person. And it was really to address the political domination of black people in this country, their economic exploitation, and of course politically domination because of disenfranchisement, because they were disenfranchised, and also the social denigration aspect of it, and saying to the black person, don't feel inferior, you know, chin up, embrace your blackness as a gift. You know, black theology then would also, you know, came in and said, it is a gift from God. And we were quite excited. I mean, when we raised the black fist and saying freedom now, I remember when we were marching in the early 70s at Fort Hare, when we were saying freedom now, we never had an idea that it would take 17 to 20 years until 1994. I mean, especially when, for example, 1975, when Frelimo, Mozambique became, you know, free, we thought ours also was coming. Then when 76 came, we said, this is it. But it was still not to be, because God has a timing, you know, in the way that he runs the affairs of the world. So black consciousness, in a sense, is a positive force to boost the dignity, the human dignity of the black person, to embrace who they are and not bleach their skin, you know, in order to because they can never be white.
It's being conscious of black people. At some stage there has been, like, you know, some sort of whitewash or whatever the case may be. And that's also because black people were referred to as animals or less than particular groups. And that's during apartheid. And we can't say all of those teachings have been eradicated at all, because people have been taught that way. That's life, that's the conversation around the table, and there are societies that black people are animals or less than anyone else, so they don't actually deserve equality. Why? You know. So I think black consciousness has a place in reinstilling the value of the majority of Africa. That's really what it is. It's looking at Africans and seeing the richness of, again, the cultures, the tribes and everything, learning from that and valuing that as part of Africa's identity. It's people.
I think it's like the same with acknowledging their presence, because they were overlooked for such a long time, and not only overlooked but obviously discriminated against. So we need to be acknowledging their presence, and that they are just human beings as all of us, and they have the same abilities and things that I have, so we need to advocate for them, I would say.
Black consciousness for me is being aware, like how Steve Biko defined it, is being aware of one's identity as a black person. Now, for me personally, I take it as sort of psychological therapy. For me, it's therapy, psychologically, it's counseling. Because what the system of white supremacy and apartheid and slavery have done, which is still a problem today in our own people, black, colored, Indian, whites, is destroyed the mentality. There's some people who are not psychologically free. Their minds are still captured. They still believe, you know, if they see a white person, they still superiority. And now it's even filtered down, where you've got black people that think they're better than colored people when they get to a certain position, and you've got colored people that think they are better than black people because of the hierarchy of apartheid. What it done, it was white, colored, and then black. And that is the challenge that we have. So black consciousness makes black people aware and be proud of who God has created you as a black person, and not all take that and use, you know, now you become superior to other people. No, but just being aware and loving who you are, taking pride of yourself as a black person to reclaim the dignity that apartheid and slavery and all these things have done.
I would define black consciousness as being aware of the black culture and just black people and the experiences and how they are affected today. And I think it is very much needed because it speaks to the identity of the continent that we are on. And just to add a bit more to that is I really feel that history has erased the identity of black culture. And I think I just want to take it back to our education system. You know, we were taught that colonists came to Africa and educated us. Where the mark is missed is that there were people that were here already that had a system going, had an understanding. It didn't look like what the rest of the world was doing, but there was an intelligence and there was a system of living already existed here. So I think that it's important to backtrack and go find those scripts and go find those important information just to educate us on, I feel like, the identity that has been stolen. There's also the psychological effect because of this, because a lot of illustrations that we see, especially in biblical illustrations, is all white, you know, and who's to say Jesus was white or black? You know, this was a conversation that our family has on the daily at our dinner table, which is, you know, why was Jesus always portrayed as white? You know, why is there only white illustrations of Jesus? You know, when he was here in Africa, do you know what I mean? So I think that's very important to add that in the conversation, so that there's that identity given back. You know, that this is actually who you are.
I guess my gut reaction would be there's no law keeping black people out of any space. So I would encourage black people to, if that concern or that hesitancy was foremost, maybe to challenge that a bit and say, okay, but why do I not feel comfortable here? And what prevents me from going there? And obviously you're going to have to be quite brave, I guess, to enter those kind of spaces. I guess certainly a white community, I mean, just where you live, like I'm just thinking, let's say it's Durbanville, where our Durbanville church is. Maybe you might feel a bit, I don't know, out of place if you, as a black person, move into an all-white street. But once again, you've got different personalities. One black person might not mind that, and they might move in and connect, while another person might be more hesitant.
Like I said, not that I've experienced. Again, this is because my generation is living off of the privilege of what was fought for us. The places that I find myself now, I don't feel I'm surrounded by a lot of white people, but a lot of black people in the same room, experiencing the same education, the same good education. So that's why I can't say I experience it anymore, because we're living off of the privilege that was fought for us.
Yes, absolutely. You know, what we did in '94 in South Africa, we just removed the physical signs that says whites only, but created this, you know, these signs that you see, you know, in your mind. You can see, for example, you've got Christian schools. That is my biggest point. You've got Christian schools and non-Christian schools. They have a diverse group of children in the school, but the teachers are all white and the management is all white. That's a white only sign. And you've got companies, you know, diverse at the bottom. A lot of black people and colored people, everybody's diverse. At the top, it's only white management. Top middle is only white. Now, what does that tell you as a black person? It's a white only sign. You can't go up. It's a sign. You know, and you know, even churches, for example. I'm not talking about a church as much, you know, where it was pre-94. It was, you know, maybe whether it used race or language to maintain a certain race only in the church. There's churches opening up in this current age, but still have these barriers. It's white only, whether you use a language or you use color or whatever reason you use, but it's still a sign. So yeah, absolutely.
I do think, yeah, there's still some exclusions where white people think that this is particularly for the white grouping only, or the white ethnic backgrounds only, but I think it's almost like, you know, just people groups just wanting to maintain. And so if I think about, for an example, like a strong area of the property market, predominantly it's quite a large amount of white people that influences that area. And I'm talking about the higher value parts of the properties. I'm not just talking about your lower end or your average scale. And I think that's a challenge, because it creates an exclusion by virtue of the color of your skin. But it is not said that the exclusion is there in terms of the black equity. BEE, I think when maybe trying to influence that for status, you bring in somebody maybe that is of color, but the motive there is there's an undertone, but you can't explain it. It's difficult to almost say, you know, you're just using this for window dressing. So in short, I think yes, there are. And so I think just looking at one sector, the property area, I think it does exist, and it's difficult to dismantle from the outside. I strongly think that the dismantling should come from the person who is within that sector and who is white himself as well, and should also recognize he has an exclusion.
I do think so. There are still establishments where people would not allow people of color into their establishment. Other things could be just a culture thing, where people would hang out in places just based on their culture and the type of activities that they would like to do.
Absolutely. There is a white-only feeling. Just like my example about the restaurant, if I go to Camps Bay today, I've actually felt the same with like, as if I'm here to look for a job. I've felt that kind of behavior towards me before. And it was unsaid. Cape Town has been a huge eye-opener for me in terms of race and the difference of people here. It's quite stark. I've had friends from Joburg, for example. They'd come here and we'd go out for lunch or whatever the case may be, and they'd ask me, where are all the black people? And I would look around and only see the ones that are working. And that's not just in one space, like Camps Bay, as I've mentioned. That's around Cape Town. Where are all the black people? Where are people my age? Where do they hang out? What do they do? You won't find many in suburban places. All of them that I have seen that are around my age group are still living at home. And that's probably because they paid less and they can't move out to other areas. And so that was really drawn out for me when I moved here.